My dad died in 2012, and as the sibling with no children, it came down to me to look after my mum. My younger sister has 4 kids, so it seemed only right to find a flat with her and help pay the bills. We picked the seaside town of West Kirby on the Wirral, northeast England, UK, because Mum had grown up there and it was a fresh start for her after Dad. After a bit of flat searching, we found a first-floor flat in a late Victorian/early 1900s house that was within our price range. The move went well, and I was in my early 40s then, just out of a disastrous 12-year relationship. It was a fresh start for both my mom and I in many ways. I fell in with a local group of 20 to 30-year-old locals and would host house parties in the flat. It was a great way to meet local people, and it kept my mom occupied, too. A bit of light-hearted distraction. One guy I knew well was Nick, a big guy of 6'5". He was at this particular gathering with 12 or so others, and we were all in the front room drinking and chatting. Nick left the room to go to the bathroom, and a moment later we all heard this crash. Myself and another friend, Phil, ran out the living room and found Nick face down on the laminate floor in the bathroom with a cut on his arm. Now, to go into my bathroom, you had to go down 5 steps from the hallway. Phil and I were laughing once we saw Nick was relatively okay, and assumed he'd missed a step and fallen. After all, he had sunk a fair few beers. We helped him to his feet, but he looked confused and was looking around the bathroom. "Who pushed me? Who fucking pushed me off the step?" He looked perplexed. Phil and I were laughing and assured him he must have missed a step and gone down too hard, but he was okay now. No, some bastard shoved me off the bloody step. I felt hands in my back." He was adamant he had been pushed, but we all put it down to gallons of beer, and that was that. Fast forward a short while. My mom met an old school friend, both ladies in their late 60s at this point, and invited this woman back to the flat for a coffee. It was around 2 p.m. This friend was sitting on one sofa. If you turned to your right, you could look through the open living room door into the hallway, and my mom was sitting on the other sofa facing the TV, with no view into the hall. My mom's friend said, "Oh, your Graham's home from work. I just saw him go across the hall into the bedroom." My mom knew I wasn't due back from work till around 8 p.m., so said, "No, it won't be Graham. It's way too early." Her friend was determined she'd seen someone go into my bedroom from the hall, so my mom called out for me, and there was no reply. Both women went into my bedroom and my mom's bedroom, and there was no one there. This got written off as odd and left at that. A while later, I had a friend called Vicky come over for a few drinks. I had a bottle of Captain Morgan's, and we were sitting on my bed messing around with each other's Tinder accounts on our mobile phones. I would pick a guy off her Tinder she should date, age range early to mid-20s, and she would pick a woman I should date off my Tinder, age range 30 to 40. In between sorting each other out for dates, we were drinking pints of rum and Coke and taking selfies. Vicky always felt odd in our hallway, as if I'm being watched, she would say, so was uneasy going to the toilet if she was staying round. She came back from the bathroom and said she had that weird feeling, so to lighten the mood, we carried on the Tinder game. We would pick up my phone to look at my Tinder, then hers, then mine, then hers, then mine. Then she flew to her feet off the bed and said, Shit, no. I had seen what she had seen too, so I said, "Show me the phone again, Vicky, show me it." She was just shaking her head and looked stunned, and it took me a few seconds for her to agree to show me her mobile phone. Now, both our phones were newish, and both were in perfect working order. Certainly, while we were playing the Tinder game, the phones were fine. While we were looking at one phone, the other was just resting on the duvet, a soft mattress beneath it, and no one was leaning or lying on the phones. They had just been resting on the bed. When I looked at her phone again, I was stunned. Imagine placing the tip of your thumb halfway down the edge of your phone screen. That half-moon shape your thumb would make on the plastic screen at that position. Well, that thumb-sized portion of the screen was pressed right into the phone. The screen within that thumbprint area was compressed and microfractured, with big cracks running outwards from that area to all edges of the screen. The damage was that bad the colors on the phone screen were blended together and the phone was wrecked, as if it had been placed on a hard surface and hit hard with a claw hammer. You couldn't press the screen in that hard with your bare hand. Vicky ran out of the flat, down the stairs, and was trying to light a roll-up cigarette outside in the garden in the rain. Her hands were shaking. I looked at the phone and was stunned. I had no explanation how her phone could have got that badly damaged in seconds. It took her a month to come back to the flat to pick up her coat that she'd left there. A while later, a friend in Switzerland off Facebook sent me back one of the selfie pics we took that night. I had posted them and said, "Who else was drinking with you and Vicky that night?" I replied, "No one. Why?" She sent me back a blown-up version of one of the selfies, and she had highlighted something behind us in blue. The pic was not great quality, taken on my S5 Galaxy phone in electric lighting at night in my room. Vicky had moved during that pic, so she was a blur. My face was clear, but behind me, over the other side of the room, by my bedroom window, was the hazy side profile of what looked like a male face, a jawline, brow line, nose. It was subtle and could only be clearly seen once the pic was blown up in size. By now, I was thinking something was weird in the flat. Maybe 10 months or so later, I got up around 5 a.m. with a dry mouth to get water from the kitchen. My mom's dog, a King Charles called Eli, followed me out the bedroom, and as I was drinking a pint of water, he drank from his bowl. I also needed the toilet, but I fleetingly saw someone pass the kitchen door, heading to the bathroom, and shook my head, stunned that my mom would beat me to the bathroom even at 5 a.m. Even Eli looked up from his bowl as the figure passed by. I stood in the hall with my legs crossed, waiting for my mom to finish, and I waited and waited, then heard my mom snoring in her bedroom. So who was in the bathroom? I looked under the door. The light inside was off, so I put the light on and opened the door a crack. No one was there, so I went in and used the toilet. A year or more later, I started dating my current girlfriend, Julie, and she would sleep over at the flat. I never told her, at first, about the oddness in the flat until she started to say she was seeing a shadow go across the hall into one of the bedrooms. By now, it was really odd, even for a skeptic like me. Julie started waking up with bruises on her arms and legs and ankles. I used to play rugby, and some of these bruises were bad, more like contact sport bruising. One time she had what looked like finger marks and a thumb around her ankle. Another time, purple, black marks on her arms that looked as if she'd been pinched really hard. I was worried that the bruising might have been a medical reason, leukemia, God forbid, so we slept at her house for a while and avoided mine, and the bruising stopped. The crux point was one night I found Julie standing dead still by the side of the bed in the darkness. I asked her what was wrong, and she said she needed to go to the toilet. I said, "You know where it is, just go." She replied, "I would, but there's a man standing at the foot of the bed, and I don't want to go near him." I flew out the bed, adrenaline pumping, and literally dived into the light switch, ready to assault some intruder. But there was Julie standing dead still, and no one else. That was about 2 years ago. Now we exclusively sleep at her place. The only instance that has made me jump was when watching TV at night with my mom while drinking a mug of coffee. It was late, and out of the corner of my eye it looked as if someone stepped into the room, then stepped back into the darkness of the hallway. It was so sudden I threw half the coffee over myself, just an unexpected reflex thing. So, there you go. My weird flat experiences. Muslim here. I keep seeing comments from people asking about what jinn are, so I decided to write a concise post. This isn't a comprehensive post, but the intent is to shed some light on an otherwise confusing topic. We refer to what Christians call demons as jinn. They are one of the three intelligent creations of God, the other two being humans and angels. They were created from smokeless fire. Some suspect this means electricity or other electromagnetic property. Humans and jinn enjoy the right to free will, but angels are restricted to the obedience of God. Some jinn are good, some are pure evil, but most are kind of in the middle. In Arabic, the evil ones are called shayateen, plural, shaitan, singular. So in English, jinn translates to demons. Shaitan translates to Satan or devil. All these shayateen are led by Iblis, Lucifer, who was cast out from heaven because he felt man was an inferior creation, but unlike Christians, Muslims do not believe he was an angel. He was a jinn. So to underscore the above, not all jinn/demons are necessarily evil. They practice many of the same faiths practiced by humans. When you call upon God for protection, no matter what faith the demon or jinn practices, it will back off. Among their tribes, they have different levels of powers. Some can fly, while others can shapeshift, imitate human voices, and some can even travel at the speed of light. Most, if not all, the paranormal phenomenon we read about, ghosts, orbs, spirits, skinwalkers, fae, dogmen, Sasquatch, Muslims, for the most part, consider them all to be some form or another of jinn. Other tidbits about jinn. They cannot be seen in their original form. Whatever we see is whatever form they've taken on. They're thought to consume bones, feces, or rotting flesh for sustenance. They're reclusive and territorial creatures and prefer to be left alone. They're likely to live in remote regions or uninhabited attics, caves, or burrows. Another place they dwell in are bathrooms. Remember that feces bit. If you encroach on their territory, you'll run into problems. Muslims believe that the witches use jinn to do seemingly miraculous or malevolent activity for their bidding. During the era of Prophet Solomon, a covenant was made by him and leaders of the jinn that they will not interfere with affairs of mankind. Despite that, there's some who will not heed the terms of that agreement. Oftentimes, a Muslim exorcist will remind the offending jinn of the agreement made with them. Muslim scholars will advise to exhaust all natural explanations before performing exorcisms or cleansing of a home. Do not use violence against them, as that can give them a reason to do the same to you. Always invoke or call on God to protect you from any kind of interaction with them. So I was sitting in my car with my husband, and I just got this horrible feeling, and he was confused, and I was too, until I looked beside the house into the woods. I saw this face. It was so pale it was almost glowing. It had sunken-in eyes, mouth, extremely defined cheekbones, but all I saw was the face. I grabbed my husband's arm in so much fear I was near to tears. This thing was so evil, and it was just observing us, and I finally whispered, "Do you not see it?" And my husband looks and sees it. He covers my range of view. He can see it too, and immediately goes to grab a knife of his, and right when I peeked over, it dissolved. It was one of the most terrifying things. I called my mom and tried to talk to her, but any time I talked about the thing, the phone would break up and just sound all weird. What was that thing we saw? I was stationed at the Ivory Coast in 2002. I got to know the locals fairly well. My parents were Muslim converts, but I was more agnostic than anything. I used to pay people to cook for me. $20 will fill up someone's pantry there. I spoke Arabic, and the locals I got to know also spoke it. One day, a local called Kashif asked me if I wanted to pay a visit to a neighbor who was possessed, and they were praying over him. I said, sure, why not? It wasn't anything like Hollywood. It was kind of peaceful. The possessed guy was chill. There was no deep growling voice or anything. He looked at me and asked what that thing was, pointing to my shirt. I've had a charm my mother gave me since I was a teen. It's a tiny leather triangle with something inside, and it's supposed to ward off evil. Usually worn around the neck or right arm. This was pinned inside my shirt behind my front pocket. There's no way anyone would know. I played dumb and said my pocket was empty. He said no, underneath. So I unbuttoned my shirt and made sure my fingers covered it and said, what? He said, under your fingers. I got a chill. I said, how did you know? And he said the name of a guy who had passed away years ago. He was the guy that wrote the charm back in Australia. I noped out. Back at base, I stood in front of the mirror trying to see if there was any kind of giveaway. Nothing. I spoke to Kashif later, and he said, Jinn can sense these things. At that point, it was like I was asleep my whole life, and there are other forces out there. I read more into their belief of Jinn, and frankly, I was terrified for a minute. This might be a little on the long side, but I can't explain what happened rationally. It's worth a read. I am not a spiritual person, nor do I believe in the paranormal, but 3 weeks ago my cat died in my arms. Our bond was remarkable. I found him as a kitten. He was crossing a dangerous country road, so I stopped, opened my door, and he just jumped into my lap and curled up there. I was his. I'm an animal lover, and I've had special pets, but Solomon was almost like a familiar to me. We even had our own special language. The week he died, he went missing on a Monday. I knew something bad had happened because he always came to me when I called to him. I searched every square inch of my house, the woods and land around the house, and each neighbor's properties for days. I even arranged to bring in search dogs. I'm telling you, if he was out there, I would have found him. I was devastated. Then Wednesday came around. By this time, most of the friends and family members helping me search were exhausted and losing hope. Can't lie, I was too. At dusk, I prepared to turn in. My body ached and my spirit was broken, but I was just so damn restless. So, setting out solo for the first time, I leashed up my dog and decided to walk the property one last time. And that's when he found me. I was losing light when I spotted him out of the corner of my eye, sitting on the bank opposite the creek, a place I had already searched a dozen times. I called to him, and he looked toward me, almost as if he was searching my face to make sure it was really me before responding, and then literally bolted towards the house. Something was strange about this interaction, but we'll come back to that at the end. So I ran back up to the house, went down to the spot where I had seen him, and searched all around the woods with the light I had left. The entire time, though, I felt pulled toward the cellar, another place I had also searched many times. And in the cellar he was. I knew as soon as I started down the steps. He answered my calls this time, the way he always has, but he was not right. He could not move. It turns out he threw a saddle thrombus, a massive blood clot, cutting off all circulation to his hind legs and tail. Solomon could not walk, let alone move or sprint across acres to make it from his spot by the bank to cellar in just the few minutes between these two encounters. He purred from the moment I picked him up until the very second he threw major clots to his lungs and brain 3 hours later. He died in my arms. My Solomon found me in the beginning, and he found me again at the very end. I cannot explain what I saw or how it happened. When I spotted him by the creek, I found it almost impossible to focus on his face, almost as if I was looking at a poor quality recording of him. And, more significantly, his eyes were completely black, not cloudy, his most distinguishing feature. Even the vet agrees that there was no way that it would have been physically possible for him to have run from the spot I saw him. I don't understand what this experience was, but I'm starting to believe that he found a way to come back to me as the end was nearing. I will never forget this moment. I was given a psychiatrist to prescribe my antidepressant medications in 1993-94. This was 2 years before HIPAA, and expectations of what a psychiatrist did were not standardized or accurately portrayed in media. Dr. X was a good-looking young professional. He was always, for lack of a better word, manic. He would keep me for over an hour and a half. My appointment was supposed to be a 20-minute check-in once a month, talking about life and the X-Files. We were both huge fans. It was the 90s. And eventually what a jerk his wife was for taping Melrose Place instead of his TV shows. Being a 16-year-old, I thought it was hilarious, and it was only once a month, so I shrugged it off. It was hard to find an agreeable doctor, so I stayed. Then the calls started. My personal landline would ring, and it was Dr. X. I don't think I fully comprehended just how unprofessional that was back then, because X made it seem like he was checking up on my mood on what was then a Friday night. He called a lot, and I tuned out his rambles as I watched TV or cooked dinner. Suddenly, he needed to see me twice a week, not once a month. I tried it for a month, but not only did that make me uncomfortable, but I also could not afford the commute, hour each direction, twice a week, so I contacted my insurance company to find someone closer. I felt he was escalating, so I ghosted the doctor and refused to pick up when the caller ID showed it was him calling. Upon meeting my new doctor, he asked me casually who my previous provider was. When I told him, his eyebrows raised. The new doctor also informed me I was on several redundant medications, the wrong strength, and many were unneeded, giving me severe side effects with little benefit. I could only wonder what the Dr. X was thinking, prescribing things so badly. So the internet took off years later, and out of curiosity in 2005, I looked him up. Holy shit. That man killed someone with meds in the 90s. Not intentionally. It was a much older man with a health condition conflicted with the meds Dr. X prescribed. I believe he was sued, but don't remember the details. I learned through transcripts Dr. X was also on a cocktail of drugs prescribed by himself. He had never been married and lived alone when the police served a search warrant. He was armed to the teeth, amassing an arsenal of illegal firearms, and peed on a fellow doctor's door while making faces at him through the glass because that doctor found out and turned him in for prescribing for himself. His license was yanked, and I read the whole complaint bit by bit online. He had an automatic weapon he kept loaded in his briefcase. I never saw him without, which was terrifying because I had no idea he was carrying. The authorities realized I was a now ex-patient, so they never told me a damn thing. Pretty sure my parents would have sued his ass off for the medication debacle. He went on a rage-filled rampage after I ghosted him. He was seen brandishing weapons, AK-47, and petty vandalism against neighbors. Why was he not locked up right away? My theory, since this was before true crime was a thing, was that he was fair, attractive, white, male, who had a doctorate, was wealthy in a conservative town, and charming, not a stereotypical raving madman. It was his word against average Joe. In a residential neighborhood, discharging his weapons led to police involvement, failing a mental health evaluation and a state board hearing. They freaked out in hindsight when I showed my parents and wondered how officials never contacted us. According to Yelp, he is now practicing and has a 1 to 2 star rating with several comments stating unprofessionalism. How does one have that kind of past and still practice? Think about all the certifications needed and insurance to practice after him already being sued 30 years ago. Be informed and check into your providers. It was never clear what caused his erratic behavior. He was very paranoid, manic, losing touch with reality. The drugs he abused only seemed to augment that. Still, I swear he had a mental illness. Having been a psychology student, I have my hunches, but it is all speculation. Okay, so this is long, but there's a lot of info. So my mom is newly widowed, October, and had been with my dad for 48 years. She still looks great, is classy, has always been faithful to my dad, and because of this has always had a line of guys interested in her, including this one. I'll call him Todd. Todd has known her and my dad for years through a local watering hole they all went to, not together, and were friendly from there. He finds out my dad passed recently, so a month ago Todd starts showing up to my mom's work. She works at a local store as a cake decorator. He initially comes in and talks to her, which isn't out of the ordinary. She has many customers who come talk to her regularly, but this time Todd says some things that let us know he's been looking for info about her online. He first says, "You're 65," and she says, "Yeah," kind of confused why he is saying it. He then says, "You were born on such and such date," and she says, "Yeah," still confused. Then he says her phone number. From then on, he began contacting her. A lot. She didn't think much of it at first, even though those are major red flags in my opinion. Todd starts coming to her work more regularly, calling and saying, not asking, to come over, too. She would say no, but he would still show up and be super pushy about things. When he would show up, she would let him in, but say, "Fine, but can you only stay a half hour," etc. He would come in, they would talk, and sometimes have a drink, and she would tell him it's time to leave. This continues for a few weeks, and then I come home to visit. My mom hadn't even told me about him before this. Then she comes home from work one day and is noticeably worked up. She says she has a friend coming over, and it's a guy. I laugh and say, "Mom, it's fine." I know my dad would have been okay with it and wouldn't have wanted her to wait. He would want her to find someone and be happy. She says they aren't dating or anything, but warns me that the guy often acts like they are a couple even though they are not. So Todd comes over, and sure enough, he does just that. I'm confused initially, and by the way he is acting, it seems like they've been dating for a few months, and I'm wondering if my mom was just afraid to tell me. She is acting weird, but I can't put my finger on it. She keeps saying in front of him that he acts like they are a couple even though they aren't. He just laughs it off and tries to grab her hand or put his hand on her leg. Then she goes into another room, and he tells me how nervous he was to meet me. He starts crying, and I think for a moment he's going to ask if it's okay to propose because he is so serious and going on about how much she means to him. He tells me that my mom was sobbing to him as he hugged her and that she just sank into him. It was creepy as fuck. Of course, she is going to be sobbing because her husband of 48 years just passed away and my dad adored her. He also makes some alarming comments, like saying my mom spends too much money. She doesn't and really hasn't had a whole lot her entire life, but she is better off financially than when my dad was here because of a few different things. My parents only recently, as within the last 5 years, purchased their first house. He also tells her privately that she's not allowed to go out with my daughter and I that weekend. I find this out later. Needless to say, I'm not feeling good about him, and I'm lost at this point, and fuming because I don't know when all this took place. I also need to add that Todd used to work with my husband. I wouldn't have even known, as I didn't initially recognize the name, but my mom mentioned it to me. So I called to ask him about the guy, not even telling him why at first, and he instantly tells me he is a snake in the grass, untrustworthy, manipulative, and vindictive. He goes on to tell me the guy was fired for stealing company time and reminds me that he has told me about him before. About 15 years ago, Todd told my husband at work that Todd would be married to my mom if it wasn't for my dad. I then remember the conversation and about how we all laughed about it and joked about it back then. I'm also very concerned at this point because I realize he has had this obsession with her for over 15 years now. So I don't address it with my mom that night because I want to collect my thoughts and I don't want to hurt her feelings. The next day she has a hair appointment and Todd had heard her talking about it. I come back from the store and Todd's vehicle is in the drive. I'm not happy at all about that. I go in and he's there talking and standing with her in the kitchen. She tells me right away that he just stopped to see her hair real quick. I find out later he just showed up without calling. He also kept asking questions and seemed a little too interested in our St. Patrick's Day plans that first night. We were going to meet up with my grandpa and go out for a bit, as we're Irish and it's a big deal in our family. I could see he was taking mental notes of what we were saying when we talked about it, so it wasn't surprising when he brought it up the next day at my mom's. I made it a point to barely say anything, and he left a few minutes later. He leaves, and I tell my mom right away that he is not effing coming with us the next day. She immediately says okay, and that she doesn't even really like him that much, so she is fine with it, to my relief. Then he knocks at the door again and walks in and says he left his phone there. My mom says he couldn't have left it anywhere but the kitchen because they didn't even go anywhere else in the house, but he makes a weird point of saying it must be on the couch when they were in there, and sure enough, it's there. Even though my mom swears they didn't go in there, but they're right next to each other, and he easily could have set it there real quick while talking to her. I almost felt as though he was listening outside, but I can't be sure. So he leaves, and I explained to her what my husband said. My husband was very concerned, to the point he said we needed to contact her work because Todd would try to get her fired, as well as contact the police and let the neighbors know. I am very concerned for her safety at this point. She trusts my husband with her life, so she takes it very seriously and says okay. She goes on to tell me she had only been talking to him for a few weeks and that he kept stopping by even though she would tell him not to. She did kind of like him, but wasn't really invested or anything like that, and I think honestly just liked having someone to talk to. She tells me that he was going through a divorce, but they hadn't finalized it because he was still on her insurance. I get that, but then he tells her that he just went to a lawyer to finally get it done. She tells him, well, I hope that isn't because of me or anything. And he tells her, well, I already paid $5,000 to the lawyer, and makes her feel obligated to him. I also find out from my uncle that he had a run-in with him. The very first week they were talking, Todd got my mom some tires for her car. She paid for them, he just picked them up. He drops them off, and my uncle is shoveling the snow in her driveway. Todd comes up and doesn't even say hi or ask him who he is, but just says, "How old are you?" in a weird way. My uncle tells him and then explains how he is related. Todd doesn't respond and walks off into the house. When he comes back out, my uncle says, "Thanks again for doing that for her. We really appreciate it." Todd doesn't even acknowledge him and just gives him dirty looks like he's jealous. I also find out that Todd told my mom some ridiculous story about my dad offering to do drugs with him at the bar, knowing my mom is against that kind of thing and she obviously can't question my dad. It's like he's competitive with my dad, who isn't even here, and it infuriates me that he would badmouth him and say something that I know isn't true. So that brings us to St. Patrick's Day. Todd shows up to her work again and just says, "Give me your keys, I'm gonna go wash your car." My mom says, "No, you can't take my car." He has never even drove it before. He's just this pushy and presumptuous. She tells him he can't go with that night. He can't come over anymore and can't call. She goes on to explain that we don't think he's good for her, that my husband is concerned, and that she wholeheartedly trusts him so that he is not to contact her anymore. She calls to tell me this, and while I'm on the phone with her, I start hearing someone pounding at her door. It is him, I find out, but I don't answer. I'm not sure how it is even possible to get there that fast. He knocks for 15 minutes and then leaves a note in the door for me to call him. I don't call but text and tell him I got the note but don't feel we need to have a phone conversation about anything. I tell him my mom explained the situation already. She doesn't want to see him anymore and he needs to respect that. He responds saying he deserves to know who said that. I tell him that's not necessary, and we would have felt the same based on our interaction with him. I failed to mention earlier my daughter was also there when we met and realized she knew him. She was the main bartender for a year at the bar he frequents, and she hated him. He constantly tried to tell her how to do her job. When he met her, he tried acting like he didn't know her at first. He pleads with me to speak to him on the phone, and I say it is not a back-and-forth discussion, and he needs to respect that. He then goes on and says he thinks it's all BS and that no one said anything at all. I tell him I will do everything in my power to make sure he stays away at this point, that we have notified her work, the neighbors, and the police. He continues to call that night. We've not heard from him since then directly, but he sent a mutual friend to my mom's work to let her know that Todd said he won't bother her anymore, but that if she wanted to call him in a few weeks after everyone settled down, that she could. This worries me that he is still holding out hope. It also worries me about what will happen when I leave tomorrow. He knows I'm leaving tomorrow as well. Several years back, I was cleaning out my house. I was renting a house for a year, and the year was almost up. I wasn't going to be living there the next year, so it was time for me to start clearing out and moving my stuff to my next place. The house that I had at the time was fairly small, but it was plenty of space for just me. I lived there by myself, and I had just finished cleaning out the living room, other than some basic furniture, and I had moved on to clean the kitchen. There were quite a few cabinets, so many that I didn't use a good number of them. I was looking through some of the ones that I didn't use to make sure that there was nothing I had in them. One of them I opened up. I saw something in the back corner. It looked like some type of shirt or rag. I grabbed it and saw that I didn't think it was mine, but when I moved it, it revealed a small white lever that I could barely see. The cabinet was in the corner, sort of by the sink and halfway blocked by the stove. I thought it was just another pipe, but it just looked like a little different to me. I got inside, and I had to crawl inside the cabinet, which was pretty large. Once I got inside, I saw there was a small trap door to the side leading into the wall. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. You had to be completely inside in order to see the detail of it, and I decided to open the door, which led to an extremely narrow hallway with a sort of crawl space. But when I got further inside, I was horrified. I saw that there was food as well as several blankets, as if someone had been living inside there. The good news, at least to me, is that whoever was in there was gone. I tried to make sense of it and figure out how long the person had been there and how I didn't know about it. I was gone from the house a lot with work and other stuff, but I didn't know how it was possible for someone to live in there without me knowing. I continued cleaning until it got pretty late, and the next day after work I continued. I was still kind of in shock with finding a secret room in my house and decided to look at it once again. I opened the cabinet and went inside, then I pulled the lever open just like I had the previous day. But this time, as soon as I opened it, I saw movement and then saw a person for a split second. They slammed the door back shut on me, and I immediately turned and ran all the way out of my house to my car and then called the police. I was so scared that I started driving away as well. I told the police the whole situation, and they came to my house a short time later to find whoever had been there was now gone. Luckily for me, I moved out the next week. I really don't know how long the person was living in my secret room, but thankfully it never gave me a problem. Thanks for reading my true horror story. As someone who has already experienced things like home invasion, I would always suggest that you lock your doors because you can never know what people can do when they are in your house. I, male, 42, live just outside of Portland, Oregon, and I love going out on my own to have a beer and play pinball. I have an app on my phone that displays the locations of any pinball machines around me, and I used to wander around the city a lot before the pandemic, crawling between bars playing pinball. I'm married, but loud bars and pinball machines are not comfortable for my wife, and I've always enjoyed going out in Portland on my own and seeing where the night takes me. The Oregon mask mandate ended last weekend, and I only had a half day of work today, so I took the train into Portland with a hankering to play some Sopranos pinball. It has always been one of my favorite machines, partially because it is clever and full of innuendo, but also because I'm usually okay at it, meaning I can get enough free plays to pass a couple hours on only a few dollars. So I arrive at the first bar where I normally play Sopranos, and I buy a beer and hit the head before feeding a couple dollars into the machine and getting started. It's immediately obvious that the machine is in need of maintenance to the point that using my remaining credits was just a waste of time. I hadn't been out in a long time, and I was determined to have a good time, so I pounded my beer and opened my pinball app to see if I could find another good machine nearby. I was surprised to see another bar with walking distance that also had Sopranos. I had never been to this particular spot, so I headed out immediately and double-timed it. What should have been an 8 to 10 minute walk took over 20 due to a large area that was closed due to road construction, which forced me to go pretty far out of my way. The sun was setting, and there was a huge group of blackbirds or sparrows that were flying around overhead. There were so many I actually jogged a bit to avoid the bird poop that I could hear spattering the road nearby. The second bar was totally worth the walk and is a really fun spot I plan on going back to. The Sopranos machine there works great, and there was a guy feeding money into the jukebox and doing a great job curating everyone's playlist. I order a second beer and ask the bartender where the bathroom is, only to find out they're closed due to a plumbing emergency. I already got to pee really bad, so I thank the bartender, pay my tab, and check the pinball app again to see what else I can find nearby. I was doubly surprised to see that another nearby bar that I thought had permanently closed was back in business, and they had a Sopranos machine too. Thankfully, this bar was a lot closer to the second bar than the second was to the first, and I make really good time getting there. The third bar is packed and has a great energy. I use the restroom and head back to the bar to get a beer before walking through the crowd to the isolated small arcade in a room adjacent to the bar. I was ecstatic to find myself in a completely empty room containing a nearly mint-condition Sopranos machine. I'm a couple drinks into my first game when a younger guy in his 20s or early 30s walks in and asks if I want to play doubles on the next game. I excitedly agree because I hadn't had the chance to play against someone in a while. I honestly don't remember his name, but I introduced myself and he started talking to me about how he was from New York and felt like everyone spends too much time on their cell phones. The old world is going to hell rant, you know the one. He seemed depressed and in need of some direction or guidance, which I wasn't going to judge about, as I was pretty much the same when I was his age. I tried to engage him and brought up some examples from history where technology shook things up but ultimately improved things on a global scale after some time. I asked him what brought him to Portland from New York, and that's when the conversation took a turn. He became really evasive and made some comments about Portland being just as bad as New York. My hackles went up a bit, and I grabbed a drink of my beer and started playing again to distract from the odd energy he was giving off. That's when he really freaked me out by letting me know that he had been following me from the first bar that I went to that night. At first, I didn't even really think about what he was saying until he talked about how crazy it was when those birds were flying over our heads, even though he was pursuing me without my knowledge at the time. He also described getting into an altercation with the bartenders at the second bar, which is just crazy because both bartenders had been really polite and apologetic about the bathrooms being out of order. The pinball machine in that bar gave me a view of the bar itself, so I would have seen any such altercation if it happened while I was there, so what he was describing must have happened after I left. He's still talking as I am playing at this point, going on like we're already really close friends, even though at this point I am just making sure I have all my stuff on me so I can leave as soon as my ball drains. And I grab my jacket the moment the ball drops, give the guy a quick, firm pat on the shoulder, and walk back through the bar and crowd as quickly as possible before triple timing it back to the train station and taking as many turns as I could along the way. I made it to the train without incident, but the encounter has sat oddly with me since. So, Mr. Everyone used their cell phone too much from New York. Let's not meet ever again and stay away from my Sopranos pinball. For clarity, I lived in a fairly quiet apartment complex on the second floor. We had an elderly neighbor, I'll call him Joe. He was about 89 years old. This happened at about 1 a.m. I was watching Netflix in bed and my partner was asleep. I had been hearing faint banging noises almost the entire night, but didn't really think anything of it. I thought I heard someone scream, so I paused my Netflix to see what was going on, but I didn't hear anything. So I continued on with what I was doing. Heard another scream, paused my Netflix, and that's when I heard someone yelling for help. I woke up my partner, and that's when we both heard, "Someone, please help, she's trying to kill me." I was fucking terrified, but I wasn't going to just not do anything, so my partner and I ran out to see what was going on. We get out to the hallway and we see Joe and some 30 to 40-year-old woman at the top of the steps. The steps were concrete and there were about 20 of them. As we take a closer look, we see Joe hanging on to the railing for his dear life and this crazy bitch trying to push him down the steps. There's blood all over the walls and he's bleeding all over the place. My partner rushes over to grab her off him and I call the police. We're really not paying much attention to the woman at this point because we're trying to see if our neighbor is okay, so she takes off somewhere. The police get there fairly quickly and get the story. Apparently, she's his caretaker and was trying to force him to drive her to get drugs at 1 a.m., and since he wouldn't comply, she was trying to force him down the steps by pushing him down them, which if she succeeded, he would have definitely died, since there are so many steps and they're also concrete. While the police are getting their reports, the ambulance gets there and they're checking on our neighbor. Out of nowhere, the lady comes, quite literally out of the bushes, and jumps in Joe's car and takes off. As she was backing out, she hit the ambulance with his car and just sped off. Not sure why she was so persistent on having Joe drive her when she had his keys anyways. The cops go after her and catch her shortly after. Turns out she's been arrested 50+ times for just about anything you can think of. Hello, little Vickies. Thanks for listening. If you like what you heard and you haven't subscribed already, please do and hit the like button, as it's very helpful to my growth here on YouTube. If you have a suggestion or simply want to say hello, please leave a comment. I love to hear what you have to say. If you have a story of your own you'd like to share and possibly have read on the channel, send it to me at veronica45stories@gmail.com. Link is also in the description, as are other ways to support the channel if you feel so inclined. I post every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday by 5 p.m. Pacific. Thanks again for being here and listening. I appreciate it more than I can ever say. And until next time, be good.